My daughters are now yours, human man. The alien king gifted his daughters to the human man. The hall was alive. Not with people, though hundreds lined the luminous walls, but with the pulse of the stone itself. It vibrated under Ethan's boots as though the entire palace were breathing, inhaling light and exhaling sound in long, patient waves. Above him, the ceiling stretched like a night sky turned inside out, nebulae trapped in stone, stars swirling lazily in captured spirals. The throne at the center of it all gleamed like obsidian under two suns, and upon it sat a figure Ethan had only seen in his fevered dreams. The alien king. The king's chest rose and fell as if powered by some internal engine, his skin catching the glow of shifting auroras that leaked from fissures in the walls. When he spoke, the vibration traveled through Ethan's bones, settling somewhere behind his sternum. Human man. The king boomed, each syllable like a strike of thunder. My daughters are now yours. Ethan blinked. Of all the things he'd expected to hear upon crash landing on a foreign world, this was nowhere near the top 10. He began, lifting a hand awkwardly. I think I missed the sign-up sheet for this part. Was there supposed to be paperwork? A prenup maybe? A questionnaire about allergies? A ripple of noise passed through the gathered crowd. Some laughed, a light, crystalline sound that made Ethan think of glass chiming in the wind, while others shifted uncomfortably, their glowing eyes narrowing. The king did not smile. From the shadows at the edge of the hall, 3 figures stepped forward. Their movements were fluid, like water poured from a vessel. At first glance, they looked startlingly human, tall, slender, faces carved with symmetrical perfection. But their ears gave them away, elongated and curved delicately upward, crowned with bands of faint bioluminescence that shimmered in rhythm with their breathing. Their eyes glowed with hues Ethan had never seen, colors that weren't on Earth's palette, tones that seemed to hum with their own frequencies. The first held herself with the rigid composure of a soldier. She met Ethan's gaze without flinching, her jaw set, her stance radiating command. The second lingered just behind, lips curved in a sly half-smile, her head tilted as though she found Ethan amusing in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The third moved like a shadow at their backs, hesitant, her hands clasped tightly together, her gaze darting from Ethan to the floor, then back again as though she couldn't decide whether to be curious or afraid. They stopped only a few steps away from him. The eldest inclined her head slightly, a gesture so graceful it made Ethan straighten in an attempt to look less like a man who'd spent 3 days stranded, half-starving, and smelling faintly of engine fuel. He started, then faltered. The words felt absurd even before they left his mouth. I don't think I'm qualified for this. I mean, I can cook instant noodles, but 3 daughters? That's a lot of responsibility. Are they unionized? Do I need to provide healthcare benefits? The sly one's lips twitched into open laughter, a sound like bells. The youngest peeked at him, wide-eyed, before quickly looking away again. Even the eldest's stern facade cracked for a moment, though she buried it under the weight of formality. The king's voice reverberated again, leaving no room for Ethan's half-hearted protests. Do you accept them, human? Ethan's mouth went dry. He had no idea what accept meant in this context. Was this some bizarre diplomatic ritual? A cultural exchange program that involved marriage? Intergalactic adoption? Space feudalism? He rubbed the back of his neck. Look, Your Majesty, Your Alienesty, Your Kingness, I just crash-landed here. My ship's in pieces, my comms fried, and my last good pair of socks got eaten by something with too many teeth. I'm really not in the right mental space to handle, well. He gestured helplessly toward the daughters, who stood as though carved from living light. Whatever this is. The hall shifted again. Ethan realized the stone itself had leaned closer, as though the palace wanted to hear his answer. The eldest daughter finally spoke. Her voice was calm, deep, resonant, carrying authority like the hum of a warship's engine. We are Serenia, Leora, and Niel. Our bond to you is not a matter of choice. It was written before the sons were born. Wow, Ethan muttered, blinking at them. That's a lot of pressure. I usually panic when someone asks me to pick a restaurant. Leora, the sly one, smirked, stepping closer. Perhaps you will learn quickly, human. Perhaps you will fall. Nielle's voice came barely above a whisper, so fragile Ethan almost missed it. "Do you accept us?" Ethan froze. The way she asked wasn't formal, wasn't part of some rehearsed ritual. It trembled between duty and something more vulnerable. Her eyes glowed with that strange, impossible color, and for the first time, Ethan realized they were afraid. All three of them. Afraid of him, of their father, of the weight of a destiny they hadn't chosen. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Ethan, very much aware that every alien in the room was staring at him, felt his knees wobble. His brain screamed for him to find a way out, but his heart whispered something else, something that made his chest tighten with an ache he hadn't expected. He exhaled, his voice unsteady. "I don't know what any of this means, but I'm here, and I'll try." The king rose, his towering frame blotting out the aurora glow. The crowd erupted in sound, some cheering, some growling low in discontent. Serena's lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but thought better of it. Leora's grin sharpened like a blade, and Nielle clutched her hands tighter to her chest. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing a weak grin. "So, do we do wedding cake now, or?" For the first time, even the king's lips curved into what might have been a smile. The palace had rules. Ethan learned this quickly, mostly because he broke them by accident within the first 10 minutes of being escorted to his new quarters. Apparently, the glowing vines running along the walls weren't decorative mood lighting. They were part of the palace's circulatory system, channeling bioelectric energy through the structure. When Ethan leaned against one to rest, the entire hallway dimmed like someone had just flicked a breaker. Guards in armor that shimmered like liquid metal immediately raised their weapons, and Ethan had to back away with both hands raised, muttering apologies about just being a tourist. His new living space wasn't a prison, exactly, but it wasn't freedom either. The walls shifted subtly when he moved, reshaping into archways or recesses, as if the palace was curious about him. It reminded him of a cat, aloof, watchful, and maybe a little judgmental. He wasn't sure if he liked being a house guest in what amounted to a sentient building, but it beat freezing outside under the twin suns. The king's daughters visited him daily. Serena arrived first, often with a seriousness that could have broken glass. She sat across from him, hands folded, and spoke of duty, tradition, the binding of fates. Ethan tried to follow, but half the words felt like he'd stumbled into a theology class taught by someone who never cracked a smile. Once, he interrupted her solemn explanation about the prophecy of the binding to ask if this prophecy had a return policy. Her glare could have peeled paint, but he swore her lips twitched afterward. Leora, on the other hand, never bothered with solemnity. She barged in without warning, poked through his belongings, and once managed to reprogram his comm device so that it displayed every message in glowing, upside-down letters. When he complained, she claimed it was training for your brain. She also dragged him through parts of the palace no guard dared follow, leading him into chambers filled with humming machines and walls inscribed with moving script that slithered like living ink. She explained nothing, just grinned when he asked too many questions. Nielle spoke least of all. She often sat quietly beside him, her fingers tracing patterns into the surface of the living table as though listening for something beneath. When Ethan tried to fill the silence with jokes, she sometimes smiled, small and shy, and asked questions about Earth. What it smelled like, if oceans really moved, if the moon followed you when you walked at night. Her voice always sounded like it was balancing on a thread, fragile but filled with wonder. Ethan found himself orbiting these three strange presences, pulled in different directions by each. Serena pressed him toward responsibility. Leora tested his limits. Nielle drew him into small, fragile moments that felt too real. And all the while, the palace whispered around them, the vines glowing brighter when the sisters came near, dimmer when they left. He began noticing the courtiers, too. Not all of them were pleased by his presence. Some watched him with thinly veiled suspicion, their eyes glowing sharper when he passed. He overheard muttered words he didn't understand, but their tone was clear enough. To them, he wasn't chosen. He was intrusion. At dinner one night, he nearly caused a diplomatic incident by mistaking a shimmering bowl of what looked like glowing noodles for actual food. Serena corrected him immediately, explaining it was a sacred offering to the palace's heart. Ethan dropped the spoon like it had burned him. Okay, so the sacred noodles are off limits. Noted. Leora, barely containing her laughter, reached over and took a bite of her own meal, which wriggled before dissolving into liquid light on her tongue. Ethan poked at his portion suspiciously. If mine tries to crawl off the plate, I'm filing a complaint. The laughter that followed startled him. For a brief moment, the table felt less like an arena and more like a family dinner, though one with significantly more glowing food and political tension simmering under the surface. Days blurred. The palace grew restless, its pulse quickening. Serena spoke of unrest beyond the walls, factions whispering against the king's decision. Ethan wasn't sure if she was trying to warn him or test his resolve. He responded with a half-hearted joke about starting a support group. Humans accidentally gifted alien princesses anonymous. She didn't laugh that time, though Nielle's shoulders shook as she tried to hide her smile. Then came the night Ethan couldn't sleep. The walls of his chamber shifted, reshaping into an archway that hadn't existed before. He followed it, half expecting to be scolded by guards, but none came. Instead, he stepped into a chamber vast and humming, filled with pillars that pulsed like enormous hearts. Energy flowed between them in arcs of blue-white light, filling the room with the sound of a storm trapped in stone. Leora was waiting, perched on one of the low platforms, grinning like she'd known he would come. "The palace wanted you here," she said. Ethan glanced at the machinery, his voice dry. "Yeah, well, I hope it also wants me to not accidentally electrocute myself." She hopped down, her boots clicking on the living floor. "You should know what you've been given, human. This isn't a gift. It's a key." The arcs of energy flared as if agreeing with her. Ethan's stomach dropped. "A key to what?" he asked, but Leora only smiled wider, her glow-bright eyes catching the stormlight. "You'll see." And then the palace itself shuddered, so violently that Ethan nearly fell. Somewhere deep below, a sound like a growl echoed through the halls. For the first time since he arrived, Ethan realized the palace wasn't just alive, it was afraid. The tremor didn't fade. It rolled through the palace like a wave, rattling the chambers and sending dust drifting from the vaulted heights. Ethan stumbled into one of the living pillars, yelping as the surface pulsed beneath his hand like a startled animal. Leora caught him by the arm before he pitched headfirst into a glowing conduit. "Relax," she said, though her grin didn't hide the flicker of unease in her eyes. "It's just the palace complaining. It does that when something's wrong." "Complaining?" Ethan shot back, clutching his chest. That was less of a complaint and more of an earthquake impersonation. On Earth, when the ground shakes like that, we either hide under a table or panic. Sometimes both, if you're me. The storm light in the chamber dimmed. Leora's smirk softened. "You're not wrong to be afraid. The factions are moving faster than expected. Even the palace knows it." Before Ethan could ask what that meant, Serena swept into the chamber with the kind of entrance that made the walls straighten as though saluting her. Nielle trailed close behind, her fingers brushing the glowing conduits, calming them with soft touches. Serena's gaze cut straight to Ethan. "You shouldn't be here." "Believe me, I wasn't planning on sneaking into your family's electric heart chamber," Ethan said, raising his hands. "The wall grew a door, and I was too curious. Blame the architecture." Serena ignored the quip and turned to her sisters. "It's worse than father feared. The northern clans call him weak for binding us to an outsider. They speak openly of removing him." Ethan swallowed hard. Removing as in from office, or from existence. Because if it's the second option, I'd like to politely unsubscribe from this prophecy program. Nielle spoke, her voice a whisper that still managed to cut through the hum of the chamber. "They won't stop with him." Her eyes, glowing faintly like twin stars, turned toward Ethan. "They'll come for you." Ethan's stomach lurched. "Fantastic. Nothing says, 'Welcome to our planet,' like assassination attempts. Do I at least get a helmet? Maybe a laser-proof vest?" Leora snorted. "If you're lucky, maybe Serena will knit you one." Serena's eyes narrowed. "Enough." She turned to Ethan again. "You need to understand. This is not ceremony. This is not play. You've been placed in the center of a storm that will either destroy us or change us forever. Ethan wanted to make another joke, but the words stuck. The three of them, so different, so impossibly alien yet almost human, were staring at him like he mattered. Like his choice, clumsy as it had been, carried the weight of worlds. He wished desperately for a manual, or at least a tutorial level. Instead, he rubbed his temples. Okay, let's pretend for a second I don't completely understand what's happening. Because I don't. Why me? Out of all the humans in the galaxy, why the guy who once failed to keep a goldfish alive for more than 2 weeks? Serenia didn't answer immediately. The palace rumbled again, softer this time, like a sigh. Finally she said, "Because the prophecy names you. A stranger from beyond the stars, bound not by conquest, but by choice. You are meant to be the hinge between our world and yours." Ethan groaned. "Great. I'm a hinge. Very glamorous. Do I at least get to squeak dramatically when history swings open?" Niel giggled, so quietly it almost wasn't there. Leora grinned wide. Even Serenia's rigid mask cracked for a moment, but the gravity of her words hung between them. The next day confirmed their fears. Ethan barely made it 3 steps into the banquet hall before chaos erupted. A figure cloaked in shifting fabric sprang from the crowd, blade of crystallized energy flashing. Ethan's brain froze. All he managed was a graceless stumble over his own feet, crashing into a table. Plates scattered, luminous fruit rolled across the floor, and the assassin's strike missed by inches, carving a smoking scar into the stone instead. Guards swarmed, subduing the attacker with beams of searing light. Ethan, sprawled on the floor with half a glowing fruit stuck to his shirt, wheezed. "Told you. I needed a helmet." The daughters rushed to him. Serenia scolded him for his lack of awareness, though her hands lingered at his shoulders longer than necessary. Leora laughed so hard she nearly toppled a servant carrying trays of liquid fire. Niel pressed a trembling hand to his chest, her glow soft and frantic. The court erupted in noise, accusations, denials, shouts in languages Ethan couldn't begin to follow. Through it all, the king rose slowly, his towering frame still commanding silence. His voice, thunder-made flesh, shook the hall. "They dare strike under my roof. Let them come. We will not break." But Ethan wasn't listening to the king. He was staring at the blade mark scorched into the stone floor, the smoke still curling from it. A realization pressed into him with the weight of a star. The prophecy wasn't some distant metaphor. It was real, immediate, and it had teeth. And yet, when he finally pulled himself upright, wiping fruit pulp from his shirt, he muttered, "On Earth, people fight over politics with bad tweets. You guys really know how to raise the stakes." Serenia didn't laugh. Leora did. Niel just held his arm a little tighter. For the first time, Ethan wondered if the palace wasn't the only one afraid. The night after the attack, Ethan couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the assassin's blade cutting the air where his neck had been, saw the fruit exploding across the floor in slow motion, saw Niel's terrified eyes when she touched his chest to make sure he was still breathing. His brain, unhelpfully, kept replaying the part where he tripped over his own feet. If there was a blooper reel for his life, that moment was going to win an award. The palace seemed restless too. The walls shifted more often, doorways appearing and closing again, lights flickering in strange rhythms. It felt like the entire building was pacing. At one point, a vine dropped from the ceiling and wrapped lightly around his wrist before retracting. He had no idea if that was affection or a reminder that he was, technically, still a house guest of a living organism with opinions. The daughters joined him at dawn. Serenia walked in first, armor clasped tight, already giving orders to guards who scrambled in her wake. Leora tossed herself onto his couch with a yawn, snatching one of his remaining Earth snack bars and biting into it like she'd claimed treasure. Niel lingered near the shifting walls, watching their glow pulse like a heartbeat. Serenia wasted no time. "Father's power weakens. The clans will not wait much longer. We cannot protect you if you stay here." Ethan rubbed his face. "Protect me? I nearly protected myself yesterday by falling over like an idiot. Maybe clumsiness is my superpower. Very underrated." Leora grinned through a mouthful of granola bar. If so, you're the most powerful being alive. But Serena wasn't in the mood for jokes. We're leaving the palace. Now. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. Leaving the palace meant leaving behind walls, guards, even the grumpy but vaguely affectionate sentient architecture. It meant open sky, open ground, and all the people out there who apparently wanted him very, very dead. He tried to lighten the mood. Fine. Road trip. Do we pack snacks, or is assassination attempts enough to fill us up? Serena's glare didn't waver. Niel's small voice cut through the tension. The palace wants us to go. It showed me the paths. Ethan blinked. Wait, the palace gave you directions? Like a glowing GPS. She nodded, as serious as ever. It showed me the wilds. Ethan groaned. Fantastic. Nothing screams safe and relaxing getaway, like a place literally called the wilds. By nightfall, they slipped through a secret archway the palace had revealed. Ethan half expected the walls to say goodbye, maybe give him a glowing souvenir or at least a high five. Instead, the vines shifted silently aside, parting to let them through. The city beyond the palace walls pulsed with bioluminescent towers, ships buzzing overhead like metallic bees, and distant shouts that carried anger. They didn't linger. Their journey into the wilds was a blur of strange landscapes, forests where trees pulsed with inner light, rivers that sang with harmonic tones, plains where the ground shifted, like liquid glass, under their feet. Ethan tripped at least once every hour, usually into something sharp, glowing, or both. At one point, he slipped on moss and grabbed Serena's arm to steady himself. She didn't push him away, though her jaw clenched as if she wanted to. The first night outside, they camped in a cavern with walls that rippled faintly, reflecting their movements like watery mirrors. Ethan sat near the glowing fire Leora had ignited with a device that looked suspiciously like a child's toy, but shot plasma when triggered. He poked the fire with a stick, muttering, "Back home, camping meant marshmallows. Out here, I'm just hoping the fire doesn't gain sentience and ask me for rent." Leora chuckled, Niel smiled softly, and even Serena's lips twitched. The next day, hunters found them. Machines shaped like beasts of bone and crystal, four-legged with glowing cores thrumming in their chests. They stalked silently, their eyes like twin suns. Serena drew her blade, Leora fired her plasma toy. Niel whispered strange notes that made the ground tremble. Ethan, naturally, panicked. He grabbed the nearest rock and hurled it. To his shock, the rock exploded on impact, chain reacting with the crystals inside the machine. The hunter staggered, circuit sparking, before collapsing into a heap of shattered light. Ethan froze, staring at his hand. Okay, either I'm secretly a superhero, or I just invented the alien version of dodgeball. Leora hooped with laughter. Serena gave him a stunned look that almost resembled respect, and Niel's eyes glowed brighter. They kept moving, chased by machines and whispers of factions hunting them. Through it all, Ethan's bumbling luck and terrible jokes kept them from collapsing entirely under the weight of fear. Each night, they gathered around their strange fire, the sisters speaking of their childhood, of duties they never chose, of a prophecy that now clung to Ethan like a shadow. And each night, Ethan felt himself pulled deeper into their orbit, not as a king's gift, not as a hinge of prophecy, just as someone who stumbled into their lives and refused to leave. By the time the alien capital's towers appeared on the horizon again, wreathed in smoke and battle light, Ethan knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just their fight anymore. It was his too. And if clumsiness really was his superpower, then the galaxy was about to be very, very surprised. The capital was on fire. Ethan had expected chaos, maybe angry crowds, maybe more glowing fruit hurled at his head. Instead, he walked into a city where towers cracked under bombardment, the sky split by war machines shrieking through the air, and factions brawled openly in the streets with weapons that hummed like angry stars. Serena led the way through the ruins with grim precision, her blade slicing down attackers who dared block them. Leora darted like lightning, laughing as she rewired enemy drones mid-flight, sending them spiraling into one another in a cascade of explosions. Niel moved quietly at Ethan's side, her hands trembling as she whispered notes that shook the very ground, splitting stone beneath their enemies' feet. Ethan, meanwhile, carried a piece of glowing crystal he'd pocketed earlier, hoping it didn't explode in his hands. He muttered under his breath, "Back on Earth, I worried about parallel parking. Now I'm in the middle of a sci-fi civil war, carrying an intergalactic grenade. Progress." They reached the palace steps, where the king's throne room had become a battlefield. Factions shouted, weapons clashed, energy blasts scorched the living stone. The king himself stood at the center, towering but weakened, his once booming voice faltering as rival leaders closed in. The moment Ethan entered, the shouting paused. Dozens of glowing eyes turned toward him, filled with hate, fear, or something worse, expectation. Serena's voice cut through the silence. "You call him outsider. You call him unworthy. Yet he has walked through your fire, fought your hunters, bled on your soil. He is part of us now." Ethan cleared his throat. Hi. Yeah. So listen, I'm not a warrior. I'm not a king. Honestly, I'm barely coordinated enough to stand on 2 feet. But here's the thing, I didn't choose this. None of us did. And maybe that's the point. A scoff rose from the crowd. One of the rival leaders stepped forward, his armor glowing like molten metal. "A fragile man of Earth cannot rule here." Ethan winced. "Good news, I don't want to rule. Trust me, you don't want me in charge. The first law I'd pass would probably be mandatory snack breaks. But I do know this. You're tearing yourselves apart because you're afraid of change. Well, congratulations. Change is already here. Me, them, all of us standing together. You don't get to vote it away." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "You want me dead because I don't fit your idea of power. But yesterday, I killed one of your death machines with a rock. Not skill, not prophecy, just dumb luck. And that should scare you, because if even I can survive this, then maybe your old ways aren't as strong as you think." The crowd murmured, the palace walls pulsing with faint light, as if amplifying his words. Serena raised her blade high, declaring her loyalty to Ethan, not as a prisoner of prophecy, but as her own choice. Leora stepped forward, tossing the dismantled core of a rebel drone at the rival leader's feet, grinning as it fizzled out in sparks. Niel closed her eyes and sang, her voice blooming into a harmonic resonance that shook the hall. The living stone echoed her song, and cracks split the ground until weapons clattered from trembling hands. The king lowered himself onto his throne, his voice tired but steady. "You see them. You see him. This is the future you resist, and I will not stand in its way." Slowly, he lifted the crown of woven light from his head and placed it before his daughters. "Rule together. Bind your fate to his. Let the old yield to the new." The silence that followed was heavier than battle. Then slowly, one by one, the rival leaders bent their heads, not in loyalty to Ethan, but to the daughters who stood with him, to the bond they had chosen. Ethan exhaled shakily. "So, we're not all going to kill each other? That's good, because I was running out of fruit to trip on." The laughter that broke out wasn't mocking. It was tired, fragile, but real. In the days that followed, the city healed. Fires dimmed, walls mended, the palace pulsed steadily again. Serena spent her time reshaping the armies into something loyal not to her alone, but to the people. Leora turned her mischief into genius, reprogramming weapons into tools of rebuilding. Niel walked among the wounded, her soft voice soothing both stone and spirit. And Ethan, he still tripped over the palace vines daily. He still made bad jokes about being a royal plus one. But something in him had shifted. He no longer thought of himself as a stranded human waiting for rescue. He wasn't just a hinge of prophecy, or the king's gift, or the bumbling outsider. He was part of something larger. 3 sisters, a world learning to change, a bond he hadn't asked for but couldn't imagine losing. One evening, sitting with the daughters under the twin suns, Ethan looked at them and said, "You know, back home I never kept a cactus alive. Now I've somehow ended up helping save an alien civilization. If that's not character growth, I don't know what is." Leora laughed. Serena rolled her eyes, and Niel whispered softly, "You kept us alive." For once, Ethan didn't try to joke it away. He only smiled, letting the sun set on a world that, against all odds, had become home. The end.